What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ, and today I'm going to make a video on a topic that I honestly thought was already understood, but it's been brought to my attention, so people have been asking me about this, and that is whether the knees over the toes rule is a myth. And the answer is yes, it is a myth to say that you can't squat with your knees over your toes if you're enforcing this rule across all styles of squatting and across all body types. This rule came from a study where they looked at the stress, the shear on the knee joint, and they looked at what would happen if you limited the range of motion to where the knees can't go beyond the feet. And what they found is once you limited the range of motion, this reduced the amount of stress on the knee joint. However, there are three problems with this conclusion to then apply it to say that you can never squat with your knees going beyond your toes. The first one is that the study didn't prove that this amount of stress is actually problematic, that this is beyond what the human body can handle. The second one is that anytime you're limiting the amount of movement in your knee, the amount of forward knee travel, what's going to happen is now you're increasing the back angle. And this is assuming you want to hit proper depth. But this brings me to my third point, that if you don't want to hit proper depth, that you say then we should just limit the range of motion overall, what's going to happen is you're going to actually have more stress on the knee joint by doing half squats, because now you're handling way heavier weights than you would if you were full squatting. So the real question we need to ask ourselves is if the extent of the stress is actually problematic in application. Now, if we take a look at Olympic weightlifting, a sport where essentially every time you're performing a lift, whether it be a snatch or a clean and jerk, your knees are going to be beyond your toes in the bottom position. If you look at the injury rate for that sport, it's actually extremely low. And when it comes to actual application, the extent of forward knee travel is really going to come down to two main factors. The first one is stance width, and the second one is the morphology of the lifter. See, if you have a wider stance squat, the amount of forward knee travel required is reduced, because now you don't need as much forward knee travel to hit proper depth. Whereas if you have a narrower stance squat, let's say a shoulder width squat, then you're going to need more forward knee travel to keep your torso decently upright. So if you actually have an Olympic style squat, I would say it's almost usually problematic if your knees aren't going beyond your toes. Also, I mentioned that morphology is an important factor as well, because people with different builds are simply going to squat differently as well. If you have longer legs, particularly longer femurs relative to your torso, then you're going to have to squat with more forward knee travel than someone with really short legs and a longer torso. However, I will say that I believe there's a reason why this myth has been perpetuated still today. And the reason is, in my opinion, is that it's an attribution error. That people are telling their lifters to not let their knees go beyond their toes, and what's happening is their bar path is actually improving. So the reason for their problems is a bar path issue. What I see a lot of people is they bend at the knees, and they just bend at the knees and don't break at the hips ever, and what happens is the bar becomes aligned over their toes. So once they're told to then keep their knees back, what happens is now their bar path is aligned with the middle of their foot, closer to their heels. So this makes for then a more efficient squat. But as I said, this is just an attribution error. You should always be able to squat with a straight bar path, and the bar should never be over your toes. You should always be able to keep it back and keep a straight bar path overall. So this isn't necessarily connected to where your knees are relative to your feet, but it's a mental cue that sometimes has that effect, as I've seen. Another reason why I believe this myth is still being perpetuated is that because for some people it is actually dangerous to have your knees go beyond your toes, even with a proper bar path. And that's due to poor ankle mobility. Some people do not have the ankle mobility to be able to keep their heels planted on the floor. But once again, it comes down to the specific details rather than just applying this arbitrary rule to everyone. If you can squat deep and allow forward knee travel but still keep your heels planted on the floor and you have a proper bar path, then it is most likely not an issue at all, and there's no reason to change the way you're squatting, especially if you're not feeling any pain. Then there's really just nothing to worry about, and this rule that your knees can't go beyond your toes is just a myth. I hope this clarification was helpful, and I hope this myth dies down eventually. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching, guys. Peace!